All right, good evening. It is Wednesday, April 9th, 2014, and it is 5:37 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana Human Relations Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Francis Rigberg Baker.
Here.
Daniel Larson. Lisa Mosley.
Here.
Peter Resnick.
Here.
Aisha Lam Sobe.
Here.
And Rizwan Udin.
Well, we have the minimum for a quorum. Hopefully others will show before long. Do I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
I have a motion from Lisa
I second it.
and second from Fran. Any discussion, any changes to the agenda that we need? All right. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
None opposed? All right. We have two sets of minutes, actually one official set of minutes, one a set of minutes for a meeting which did not have a quorum. Do I have a motion for approval of both sets of minutes? You have to turn on your mic.
Yes, great. The light's on.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
You're just being quiet.
Oh. I motion that we approve the minutes.
All right.
I second.
Motion by Aisha, second by Lisa. Any discussion, any changes to the minutes that anybody saw? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries. All right. Public participation. We have a few people participating this evening. If you're here to talk about the prior conviction enforcement rule, that's coming up next in the agenda. So if you'd like to speak to that item, please come up, state your name, and say anything you would like.
Right. Aaron Ammons, 1108 North Busey in Urbana. And it's nice to come and grab this microphone and be able to smile and be happy about hopefully the implementation of some what I feel like is very good public policy. I really want to, I guess on behalf of CWC, thank you all for your diligence on this topic. We've been working on this for quite some time, and the openness that you all have displayed and all of the support from the staff, it has really meant a lot to us. We think it's going to be a tremendous inspiration to our community. Hopefully that it'll be a beacon of light and inspiration to surrounding communities, even those that surround us on Wright Street. We're hoping that it'll be something that we can really look forward to in the coming years. And I just wanted to come and thank you all for all of the work on this issue, and hopefully we'll be back to see you again soon about something and have as much fun as we did on this. So again, I just want to thank you all very much for your support.
Appreciate it very much. Any questions for Aaron? Thank you. Anybody else wish to address the commission?
James Kilgore, 511 South Draper, Champaign. I just want to echo Aaron's sentiments and just say that it's going to be a really nice feeling to send out emails to people across the country to say that Urbana can become the 57th district, county, city in the country to pass a ban the box ordinance. So this is great news. I know it's not a new ordinance, but you are now officially in the ban the box category. So part of a much bigger movement. So thank you very much for your diligence on this. It took a long time, and I know Todd has probably got 27 versions of this thing on his computer, but now this can be the one that says final version. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to this? Good evening.
Good evening. Michael Lopez in Urbana. What's important about this to me is I wanted to let you guys know that this is already making a real difference. For my own frustrations not getting jobs, I was able to direct somebody to your office. I know that Todd has said, you've had cases like this before, but the point is, I didn't know that, and I wouldn't have known that I could have sent someone here and that there could have been actually any action taken on it. So that's an actual and real social change that's happening, whatever the downstream consequences of each individual case. So on behalf of citizens with conviction, in general, thanks, and keep doing the good work.
Thank you. Anybody else? Good evening.
Hello, my name is Dwayne Blackwell, 1408 West Hill, Urbana. I just want to thank you all for really taking the initiative to do this and to pass this, because this is something that seriously needs to be done. A lot of people are discouraged about, with that being on the applications. And so I'm glad to see this being done. I just want to thank Aaron and everyone else who's taking the time to have this done. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the commission? All right. That concludes public participation. So we're moving on to item 5, old business. And the first item on the agenda, A, is a motion in support of the prior conviction enforcement rule. Todd, would you like to introduce anything that we need to know about this? Is there anything more that we need to know about this?
No, it's the same rule that we reviewed 2 months ago. I believe that's when we reviewed it. There haven't been any changes except for the correction of a few typos. I've found some more, so I'll make those corrections. But the rule as it stands, I think, represents quite a bit of thought and quite a bit of consideration. Hopefully later this month I'll actually be publishing the Human Relations Office's response to the comments that came in. But this is in part a response to those comments. It's been modified in order to reflect sort of the better thinking that came as a result of those comments. So I'm happy to take any questions about the rule as it stands.
Any questions or comments?
The only thing is the language of exempt or covered and not covered employers versus positions. Is that
I think we talked.
Just settled now?
I think we've
Okay.
decided that rewriting it to do what I think we agree would be the more logical thing, but would be enough of McGill at this point. It's clear enough that it says you can't, even as an exempt employer, exempt all of your positions. It goes into that detail. So
Okay. That's
I think
fine.
application-wise, it will be the equivalent.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, so there was a motion written up in your packet, and I would only suggest one little change for whoever is going to introduce this motion. I don't think it can be me. But it says down at the bottom, Todd was telling me earlier that because we're not an official legislative body, we don't issue resolutions. So this is a motion in support of, and I just would suggest that where it says now, therefore, be it moved by the Urbana Human Relations Commission, that we simply change that. I think you were trying to do a quick global replace. Maybe change that simply to read, now, therefore, the Urbana Human Relations Commission recommends as follows.
Yeah.
So this is at the very bottom of the resolution. This was not in the
Page
original
1.
packet. It was an add-on. There were 2 that came later. And so, I'm happy to read the whole thing, and we might as well. So if that change were to be put in, it would read as follows: motion in support of the Urbana Human Relations Office enforcement rule governing inquiry into and consideration of prior arrest or conviction record by employers. Whereas the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance has prohibited discrimination against individuals based upon their, quote, prior arrest or conviction records, end quote, since the adoption of the ordinance in 1975, and whereas the Equal Opportunity Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, has released an enforcement bulletin which, among other things, concludes that, quote, national data supports a finding that criminal records exclusions have a disparate impact based on race and national origin, end quote. And whereas the Human Relations Office has published the Urbana Human Relations Office Enforcement Rule governing inquiry into and consideration of prior arrest or conviction record by employers, hereinafter the rule, in order to increase the effectiveness of the enforcement of the City of Urbana's prohibition of discrimination based upon prior conviction. And whereas the rule does not alter existing law, but rather articulates the standards that the Human Relations Office will rely upon when investigating and evaluating whether the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance's prohibition against discrimination based upon prior arrest or conviction record has been violated. And whereas the Human Relations Commission received public input regarding the probable impact of the rule on covered businesses and protected class members, now, therefore, the Urbana Human Relations Commission recommends as follows: that the Commission supports the adoption and implementation of the Urbana Human Relations Office Enforcement Rule governing inquiry into and consideration of prior arrest or conviction record by employers, moved and adopted by the Urbana Human Relations Commission this day. Do I hear a motion? No, you can just say move as stated if you like.
I would move as stated.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, so a motion by Lisa, second by Fran. Any discussion of this? This has been on our plate for quite some time.
I noticed that.
I actually checked some of the old minutes, like way back, years back, and I'm like, I keep seeing it. It's been there. I mean, it's taken a long time.
And I think we've done a diligent job of collecting input from the community. We've gotten wonderful feedback from CWC, and business leaders actually gave us very good input into this, and I think made substantive and positive changes to the enforcement rule that Todd's got. So I think we should be proud of what we've got here. Okay, hearing no further discussion, do we do a roll call for this? So if you would, take a roll call for the vote.
Francis Rigberg Baker,
Aye.
Lisa Mosley,
Aye.
Peter Resnick,
Aye.
Aisha Lam Sob.
Aye.
So that motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. And applause for you all, too. Thank you for your hard work.
Definitely.
All right, moving on to our next order of old business. This is a motion in support of vehicle for hire ordinance recommendations. Todd, why don't you update us on where we're at on this, and we can have a little discussion.
I think that we may not be quite at the point of being ready to pass this. We had a significant amount of discussion in October and November, and I believe also December, on this memo, the memo that my office produced, and the recommendations that are contained within the memo. And so I'm bringing it to you for consideration so that we can begin to move the item through, make the adjustments that we need to make to it so that we can get the council the recommendation that they've requested.
And could you give a quick summary of the memo, just to bring everybody up to speed?
Yes. So, in a way similar to what we found with prior conviction, the same document and the same language applies to any exclusion that is based on criminal record. So anytime in the United States, at least, where you have an exclusionary practice that is solely based upon criminal record, particularly those that are blanket based, right? Everybody with this criminal record, or everybody with this conviction, or everybody with this series of convictions, those are generally going to operate to create a disparate impact against specifically African Americans and Latinos. And so as a result of that, the rule that we were asked to review, or the ordinance that we were asked to review, basically in the vehicle for hire ordinance, basically says that individuals with a criminal conviction less than 4 years old, or who are less than 4 years away from being incarcerated, it's been less than 4 years since they ended their incarceration, basically will not be able to qualify or will not be granted vehicle for hire licenses, which in most people's terminology would be taxi cab licenses in the city of Urbana. And so we were asked, as a result of a discussion that occurred at the city council, to review particularly regarding the human rights implications of such a rule. And so the memo basically says that yes, it does create a disparate impact on African Americans and Latinos, and if you want to ameliorate or mitigate that disparate impact, what you would really want to do is create a system where those individuals who would suffer that disparate impact, basically the individuals with convictions less than 4 years old or less than 4 years away from incarceration, you would want to create a system that reviewed those cases and made sure that the underlying purposes of the policy itself were being served by their exclusion. The underlying purposes of the policy, my understanding is that it's public safety, for the welfare and public safety. And so what the panel or what the reviewing parties would be asking is whether or not giving a license to these individuals after doing this individual assessment would constitute a threat to public safety or would endanger in some way the public safety or public welfare. And so as I said, the memo recommends that there be a panel that review this. I think it's similar to a practice that many employers have, particularly public employers, when they're looking at individuals with criminal backgrounds. A lot of them have panels with 3 or 4 people, one from HR, another one from risk management, another one from an operations department, and they review the application to see whether or not, in that case, there's some type of linkage between what the person's applying for and their conviction. In this case, the review would be centered upon whether or not, based upon the circumstances of the individual's conviction, whether or not they would represent a danger to or a risk to public safety or endanger public safety. So hopefully that summarized it for everyone. I'll be happy to take any questions.
So we're going to still have, or not recommend against having this 4-year aspect? Because that seems to me that had to have been argued against rather well. And then still have the same safety net here for when there's a perceived possible problem.
So what I would say to this is, as we looked at the policy, we could find no real justification behind, no empirical justification or even theoretical justification for a 4-year time limit. It seems pretty arbitrary, except it happens to coincide with 4-year degree, 4-year high school. But I'm not exactly sure what the justification, and I did not have an opportunity to speak with the individuals, or did not take the opportunity to speak with the individuals who actually put the 4-year requirement. We did look at other cities, and in the cities, some have 5, some have 3, some have 7. So there seemed to be no real pattern there. So I'm not exactly sure what 4 years represents. It appears to be completely arbitrary. The reason that my office, and the reason that I did not recommend after reviewing this, that we completely get rid of the 4-year requirement is because it appears that the more incremental approach, the more conservative approach, would be to just address the people who would be adversely affected by the current rule. And I'm more of a person who, I'm risk averse, so I tend to take the more incremental steps wherever I can.
Okay, so after the 4 years,
It would be the same as it currently is, which is you can be licensed.
period.
And
This nice recommendation at the end, so with the lovely review, et cetera, that's not going to apply?
right. And
That's
So-
disappointing, because I think that's a good idea.
And one of the things that I think we as a commission need to decide here, I mean, Todd has made a recommendation to us that, because we have been asked by the city council to please make a decision on these, on this issue. And Todd has given a recommendation to us, this is what I think would go forward. It's now our responsibility to make a decision of, do we want to forward this as is to the city council? Do we want to make adjustments to it? Todd can make his own recommendations to city council as staff, and we've been asked as a commission to make a recommendation. That's a good question. We do have a tradition of doing that, and I'm happy to do that. So after we finish asking Todd our introductory questions before any motions, but I'm glad to take that. So thank you. We can make the recommendation in any form we want, which could also be not to recommend a specific change to their ordinance or rule, but to lay out what we think the pros and cons are, and you know, where they're going to get into trouble and where we think they're on fine ground and all that stuff. So we don't have to be perfectly specific. We can make whatever recommendations we see fit.
I have some questions.
Please.
All right. So the license, this isn't for the owner of the company. This is for each individual driver has to have this license. And is this license like in New York City, where you essentially the license goes with the car and it's a large sum of money? Or is it just some license like at the Department of Motor Vehicles?
I think it's somewhere in between.
My understanding.
Costs more than 200? More than 2,000?
No,
Or-
my,
okay.
my understanding
I
this
can
is.
look it up to find that out.
This is a certification by the city for your ability, your personal ability to drive a cab
Within the city?
within
Okay,
the city.
because I mean, like right now, like the whole sort of like industry is being turned on its head. Maybe not in Little Urbana, but I mean places like, you know, companies like Uber and other places, nobody looks at anyone's record. So I guess what I'm wondering is, if you're gonna, it seems like the time is sort of arbitrary. What about like when you say if having been out of, you know, you've got this 4-year limit, but I mean, does like what the crime was matter? I mean, it just seems to me kind of arbitrary. I bet it would make a great dissertation in history. Go back and find out where this thing came from. So I'm saying, is there anything, because it seems like they can't, okay, so this is like the employer, the owner of the cab company, is the one who is checking these the drivers, or
This
it's
is
the
a-
city?
This is a license that the city issues. I think there's a $20 annual fee.
Mhm.
And the license gives an individual the right to operate a vehicle for hire within the city of Urbana.
But that's not the only thing you need to be able to drive a cab in the city. I mean, there's like a lot more regulations, aren't there? Like,
Well, that's something that I could provide additional information on. I'm not aware of any other than, you know, you have to have a driver's license. And there are other requirements in the ordinance itself in terms of your driving record and things like that.
right. It seems like that would be like a good thing, like driving record. That would be good. But
I just want to take this opportunity to hand the gavel back over to Dan, who has now arrived, and let him take over the chair.
Thanks, Pete.
Are there any additional questions from the commission?
To clarify, there's nothing in place now after the 4 years, which is all very limited. The 4 years just applies to one very particular thing, which is this arbitrary thing, whether you've been incarcerated or not. Doesn't matter what it was or any circumstance. And then you go to, there's absolutely nothing in place when it comes to the city's responsibility to protect the public, whether people have been in prison or not, or whatever.
Peter.
Is that correct?
That is correct, and now I'll feel a little freer to float since Dan now has the gavel. So one of the things that I've been thinking about this is we've been asked what the problem with the current state of affairs is. I think as a Human Relations Commission, we can say there's this disparate impact problem that you're causing by saying flat out for the first 4 years after your conviction, whatever the felony is, you simply can't get a license. And I think we can justifiably say to the City Council, we think that's a bad idea. You should stop doing that. Once we go beyond that, if we as a commission said, you know what, beyond those 4 years, there could be danger to the public, that's not exactly our mission statement. As a Human Relations Commission, we're here to talk about the discrimination aspects. And I would feel more comfortable if we simply said, on the question of denying people licenses, we think you should stop doing that. You should have, if you're going to do something about felony convictions, you should have a panel to review people who've had felony convictions and decide the public safety aspects. But don't go beyond that and say, the number of years seems arbitrary to us, doesn't make a difference. We don't see any discriminatory help or harm by changing that number in any particular direction. But that's your business, and that's about public safety.
Right. But what we've got here in this recommendation, in a general way, I think it's good. It says that once an appeal is received, if someone is denied this license, there will be an individualized assessment to determine whether there is any reasonable basis. I would take out that part, based on the applicant's prior conviction status. You can throw that out. There is any reasonable basis to include that licensure of the applicant would endanger the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. Why isn't that good? Why isn't that? I mean, they're going to turn down some people for, I don't know what their reasons might be. Maybe, are they not permitted to turn down anyone? They would turn down people who don't have driver's licenses or something, but are there under any, do they have any responsibility to consider the public safety at all?
The newly recommended panel, you mean?
The people who are handing out the licenses.
Right.
Yeah.
So my presumption would be and that if the City Council were to set up such a panel, that panel would be given a whole set of instructions of what to consider. But the person would get to the panel because of the conviction issue, right? That, finding out whether they have a driver's license, all that stuff is now sort of automated, I take it. They tick the boxes and make sure
no
that
oversight.
There is currently no oversight beyond, are all the correct boxes ticked? Do you have all the right documentation?
Right. And I think that conviction status aside, and there is the issue of public safety, and independent of and we don't want discrimination or disparate impact either. But at some point, if somebody, in the interests of public safety, denies someone a license, if that should be something that they're able to do, then we would have all this way of considering. And maybe it wouldn't be exactly like this, because we're not just concerned about prior behavior, possibly, not necessarily conviction or lack of it. Then why isn't this? This is a way of making sure that people aren't turned down arbitrarily or through discrimination or anything else, through stereotyping, through prejudice, etc. So I guess maybe that's just totally beyond the scope of this, but I am concerned that I think the conviction thing is almost a red herring here. Because my concern is when I tell a victim of sexual assault to get in a cab and go to the hospital, I don't want to put her in a dangerous situation. I want any member of the public who gets into a taxi to feel reasonably safe, because you're very vulnerable in that position. So is the driver as well.
I was going to say, I bet there have been more crimes committed against taxi drivers if you looked in.
Yeah, it's dangerous
You
for
know.
everybody. But I'm just saying that that I'm a little disappointed that I think this is good as far as it goes, but I think there are bigger problems.
Lisa?
I really like the idea of having a commission looking, or a panel, that's the word I want to use. I too have the same concerns, Fran, but yet I think it is a different conversation. I work in a school, and I often have cabs taking kids that are homeless to and from because they, let's say, are in Urbana now, and that worries me too. Just like it would with public transportation getting on a bus. I think there is that risk. I think we have to look at that issue separate than what we're looking at as far as this issue today. But I do have those same concerns,
Right.
for the record.
And I think the same concerns about using the conviction as some kind of a marker of you're safe or it's not safe is the same. We don't want to have discrimination there, and we've made that clear. And I think that's very good. And I really do think you're right that this issue goes beyond the issue of what's happening to people who have prior convictions. So, okay.
Thank you all. Now we welcome comments from the community on this issue. Gentlemen?
Oh, it's nice to be back again already. Oh, I tried, Todd. I tried, man. All right, so we find this to be a very sticky issue for us as well, CWC and the community at large. And I definitely don't want this to take 18 months to get done, but it is a sensitive topic. So my first concern was the disparate impact, and my coming to this particular body. I appreciate what you said, Peter, and I'm listening very intently to you, to Fran, about your concerns about the safety. And I do think it's a dual thing because the drivers have to be safe as well. And, you know, that's a little bit different discussion, though, and we could unearth a lot of different topics around that. So this body, as Peter said, is to address in particular any violations to basically the human relations or human rights ordinances that we have in the city of Urbana. And just using the ban the box framework and context, we see that this is the same situation. And we didn't make, you know, any big, you know, public outcry or big deal about the fact that even the city of Urbana was in violation of the ban the box ordinance. I find it equally as troubling that there would be a agreement with ordinance in Urbana, or even an agreement with another city that says that we're going to cause a disparate impact on a protected class that we have on our books. So the first step is indeed to address what that disparate impact is. And I do agree that as the legislative body, the city council is duty bound to address the issues of public safety. It could be some overlap, but I'm comfortable with the point that you made, Peter, about that. To address just briefly the issue of public safety, what we were highlighting through the ban the box ordinance and all the time we spent on that is that employment is a huge part of public safety, because when individuals with felony convictions have employment, they're a lot less likely to recidivate. And there's a growing desire in our community. I remember years back when I had a desire to open a cab company. There are cab companies and shuttle companies opening all over the place now. So there's growing numbers of individuals, several of whom we've talked to, one in particular who's really ready to move forward. But this is stopping this individual. The 4-year period is stopping this individual from moving forward with a wonderful idea, a beautiful plan that's going to help him and many other people in our community. And he stopped dead in his tracks because of this ordinance. And it would be another 1.5 years before he would be able to implement that. And it would create employment for himself, possibly other people in the process. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this is adversely affecting at least one individual that we know of, if not many more, at this very moment. My concern about a council, Lisa, or a panel, is that what are they going to use to gauge whether or not this person is a risk? This individual has served their time. They've been through rehabilitative processes. They have valid driver's license. They are citizens within the community now. So what is a panel going to look at to say whether or not this individual is safe? Can they safely drive someone here, to wherever they're going, right? So like many occupations we have in our society, there's nothing, whether it's the police department or fire department, there's nothing we're going to be able to do to make them 100% safe in the occupation that they do, right? And I understand that we're addressing the citizens that they're carrying at this time. I don't know what the rule is that MTD uses. I'll just throw that out there. Usually I'm not supposed to say things I don't know the answers to. That was my training with Todd through lawyers. Ain't that what you taught? No. Oh.
Yeah.
But I know that that individuals with the background, with felonies in their background, have received employment with MTD. So one of the questions that was raised is that the vehicle for hire, does that mean just people? Does it mean that you can't haul particular items, hazardous materials, and all that kind of different stuff? Does it cover that? That was a question that we had. So it's just a lot of different things, but I would urge the commission to look at what the disparate impact is and to know that we have an agreement right now that causes a disparate impact. I think that's the immediate concern at this point, is how do we address that? And our position all along has been that we're sensitive and understanding to compromise in these situations. The 4-year look-back period to us just seems so arbitrary. It's not connected to anything, and it's after an individual who has valid driver's license and no issues, especially with the driving records and stuff, and they're being denied. Just outright blanketly denied for 4 years. We think that's way too long of a period. And the average number, even for instance, for an individual who was on parole, who has served time in the penitentiary and come home on parole, is 2 years. So I think that's about all, unless you have questions.
Do you feel that this proposal is going to solve the problem? For example, for this individual, would he then, Todd, the person who wanted to start this cat company, say, would he be automatically turned down now?
He would be, yeah.
But under what we're recommending, he would go before, he would have his case reviewed by the criteria set forth in this, and they could determine that, all things considered, it's fine. Is that what we're doing here?
I think that's what the recommendation says, and I haven't had a chance to actually read all of that. My concern, Francis, is that much like the work that we did with Ban the Box, what we're trying to change, there's a shift, a paradigm shift in the thinking that we're trying to address here, is that everyone who has a felony conviction is not a threat to public safety. right? And so just letting that resonate in the minds of people first and foremost is extremely important. And what you will be doing in this situation with this individual who has been home for over 2 years now, hasn't been in any trouble, has valid driver's license, insurance, and everything. This person would still have their fate decided by a panel. And why? What gives this panel the authority to determine whether or not I am legitimate when I have valid driver's license and I've already paid my debt to society and all those different things? Why am I still being punished? I think that is still at the core of what we're talking about and being locked out of an opportunity. Because if the panel says no,
Right.
right,
And the burden of proof is against that person.
And what
on
is
that-
the burden of proof
The burden of
anyway?
proof is there. And the
What
problem
is it, though? What is the burden of proof?
the
I mean, I guess what I'm
It's
saying
to
is,
show-
you have a
it's to
council,
present
what's the
evidence.
evidence? What is the criteria that they judge that
Well,
someone is a
it's-
threat to public safety or
Well,
not?
that's the problem. They have no idea. And
Right.
that's the problem with the whole
Right.
thing.
I mean, it
If they're not going to have any standards, then they shouldn't have any
they do.
standards. I mean,
yeah.
Well,
Not
this
just pick
talks
on
about
these
8
people.
factors that they would look at.
Yes.
And they would consider, and you're right, it's left up to other people to decide, and where there's subjective and objective opinions and things like that. To me, it was an intermediary step, and there was some guidelines. So they really had to show that this person really shouldn't be doing this kind of thing, for whatever these reasons would be. But it doesn't
Well-
sound like we're ready to move towards that. No.
well, I don't want to just make it, I wasn't supposed to make it very complicated, but it's such a sensitive issue.
Sure.
I mean, this whole thing is built around access to employment. That's what we're talking about. People who are wanting to be in the job market or to be able to do things for themselves. And in particular, for entrepreneurs, this is extremely troubling because I'm not going to an employer asking to be a part of your company and all of those types of things. I want to create something for myself. And I've turned my life around. I've done all these different things. I've paid my debt to society, yet I have to pay more, and I'm legitimate. I can drive. I can do what other drivers do, but yet for some arbitrary reason, I'm just locked out of this opportunity. It's hard to swallow that. So,
But you did mention things in terms of ideas resonating, and I think that the kinds of things that this group is supposed to consider does promote the idea that every conviction is not the same, and that there are a lot of things to think about when you're evaluating that particular aspect of a person's past.
right.
So I think in that way, it's good. I'd like to see more of it. that kind
I mean, in all fairness, we know that even as we worked through the ban the box piece, we understand that a particular conviction in relationship to the type of employment there's some autonomy or there's some authority that the employer maintains in relationship to that. This one is extremely tricky because if you have someone who had an issue with driving 10 years ago, and now they go before the panel, and the panel is like, well, no, you had an issue with driving, even though you have a valid driver's license, we're still going to deny you. It's just, I think it's just a work in progress. It takes some time to actually look at what that's going to be. I just didn't want to seem as though that we were closed to what compromise would look like. And it sounds to me that what we have had the opportunity to discuss was that the look-back period being more like an average look-back period, if any look-back period at all. But we still think that the concern from this council or this commission is that the look-back period is still going to have a disparate impact. So, okay, I think I've rambled on enough. If there's any more questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone in the discussion that this is basically just a recommendation that is being made to the council. So one of the things that we discussed in an earlier meeting was the degree to which we would meticulously lay out each detail for the analysis, for the standard of review and that type of thing. And I think in terms of my recommendation and what my office did, I chose to basically lay out some of the framework, but leave much of it to the discretion of the legislature or of the legislative body, because obviously this is an extremely sensitive issue, and we were particularly tasked with looking at the human rights implications. And so I tried to address the things specifically that dealt with human rights that was sort of based upon the collective expertise of the commission, but to leave many things basically unresolved, particularly what's going to be the standard of review. How many people would there be on a particular review committee? What would that review committee be made up of? That seems like something, certainly if the commission wants to have input into that, and if you want to detail that, that's fine. We can put that either in addition to or even instead of the recommendations that have been made by my office. But it would be a decision, right? It would be a decision that you all would make to say, hey, we want to get really into the weeds of this and really try to define out in our recommendation. Obviously, it could be changed or rejected when it got to the city council, obviously. But, you know, it would be your decision because it's your recommendation. I'm just providing some information and some findings to try and help you along in making that recommendation.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a small point. I think, one of the things is how we frame driving as an occupation, and I think, it seems that in most cases when this gets talked about, we have a male taxi driver driving children or women home, and that's the example that we think of. But I think that in actual fact, what we're looking at here is a whole range of vehicle for hire options as one of the most accessible avenues of employment for people with felony convictions, that it's an entrepreneurial opportunity that requires relatively low levels of skill, relatively minimal capital. And so in thinking about this, I'd like to see people also think about what are the possibilities that by opening this up, what are the possibilities for employment that could be created by having a policy that maximize the opportunity. Not that we want to cast aside public safety, but that's not the whole picture, and we need to think of several scenarios of people driving, who they might be driving, what they might be driving, what kind of vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't just get stuck in our head with the idea that we have this predatory taxi driver who's going to remember where somebody lives and is going to come back later and do something horrible. None of us wants that to happen, but that's probably a very, very small part of the realm of possibility in this issue. So I just want to try to complicate the vision a little bit.
I think that part of these things are not, maybe sometimes there's no actual danger, but there's fear,
right?
Mm-hmm. and that and when you say that someone, like none of our drivers have any criminal record or something like that, and you're actually kind of feeding the stereotype, and so what I like so much about the recommendation here is that the kinds of things that the council or whoever's the reviewers are considering are the kinds of things everyone should think about, and not just stereotype. That's anybody who's had a conviction. The convictions for certain kinds of crimes are more of a concern than others. I may be a little too close to that to be able to see it rationally, but that's just part of this journey we're all taking, I guess. But there are stereotypes even in those cases. And I hate stereotyping. To me, it's the foundation of all discrimination and an awful lot of damage. And so that's what I think we should, among other things, focus on the educational potentials here for the community and for the public at large. And that's part of what I hope we're doing with both of the recommendations that we're sending to the council. So,
Yeah,
thank
I think,
you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think that's a really great point, about dealing with the issue of fear and how, and to try to avoid thinking of the example that gets people to respond to the fear component rather than let's think about it as let's try to respond to the opportunity component and find ways to make sure the things we don't want to happen don't happen. But let's keep the opportunity in place rather than the disaster.
Todd, our analysis, the analysis talks about the ambiguity of the 4 years, but does our recommendation ask the city council to consider changing that language to either, or cutting and or changing that language?
No.
Okay.
And as I had mentioned before, I took a pretty incremental,
Sure.
what I
I'm
would
sorry.
consider to be a conservative approach to.
Sure. I'm sorry, Miss. Okay. Please. Hello.
Hello. I haven't seen you yet this evening. Hello. There's a bunch of things floating around in my head, and I'm more nervous this time than when I was saying thank you. It's easier to say thank you. So first, I'd like to say to Aisha, thank you for pointing out that more cab drivers probably suffer violence against them than the people being driven. If I have money in my pocket, I can get in a cab and nobody vets me.
Or if you don't have money in your pocket, they still don't vet you.
Yeah, and so that's not a negligible point if we're going to talk about public safety. To increase disparate impact is to decrease public safety. Let's not forget that. So when we're talking about public safety, also, I'm sympathetic to the concerns that you're raising. Before I offer a distinction, which I may or may not offer, I may chicken out, but something like 5% of sex offenders reoffend. All right? That's the recidivism rate for sex offenders, 5%. Most people think it's astronomically higher to the extent of 100%. You have to break apart a distinction before that starts even beginning to make sense. So it's also worth remembering that of 400,000 child abductions, 395,000 were by non-custodial parents. So somebody can do the math for me. You can tell me what percentage of stranger danger that is. It is also the case that every sex offender who's gone through the system has their DNA logged someplace, and driving around in a public cab and leaving my DNA all over it and thinking that I'm being clever and going to get away with a crime is probably low on my list of priorities. Ted Bundy never drove a cab, for example. You drive your own car so that you can get rid of it. What I'm pointing to is that a taxi is a publicly visible thing. People know what they look like. You see them driving around. It's not the sort of thing you try to fly under the radar with. I find it very hard to imagine that a convicted sex offender would use a cab as a means for finding victims. Historically, they tend to prefer churches and other places where they have a sort of cover of self-righteousness, or scout meetings and so forth. It's usually not driving around strangers in cabs. So, and I mention all of this because the public safety issue seems to be wrapped up specifically in this admittedly alarming and very serious possible convictions, child molestation and rape in particular. Actually, those are synonyms technically. And so to frame the entire discussion of this in terms of this very narrow one conviction is, really skews the discussion in a not helpful way. And I don't think it would be useful to say, well, okay, let's just say sex offenders can't, because then there's the slippery slope part. If we can say it's okay to discriminate against this particular subclass of felons, that just becomes the grounds for creating disparate impacts all over the place. Whoever it was that noted, oh yes, James pointed out that entrepreneurship amongst cabs is an easy means for poor people, to get started. It's a great place where immigrants of all sorts have been, seizing the golden ring of the American dream forever. And it seems very obvious why you would want to close that door if you were interested in discriminating against the poor. That's a great place to go. Let's close that down and make sure that doesn't happen. If we were going to have panels, right now in our own city, or maybe it's in Champaign, let's just pretend it's in Champaign. There's a fellow walking around with TB, and they're trying to make him stay in his house and get a court order to lock him up in his house. I don't know how any of you would feel about this idea that because you have TB and you're not wearing your mask when you're going out in public and are a public safety hazard, in theory, that it's okay to unofficially incarcerate somebody in their own house for that reason. If that sort of doesn't sound quite right, then probably vehicle for hire prohibitions also shouldn't sound quite right. If there was panels, one of the things that I think about with panels is there are a whole, 79? How many licenses are there in the state of Illinois? Vocational licenses? I think it's something like 70, 95 or so? 95 or 79. We're talking here about a specific kind of license. There's actually, say, 79 to 95 or so that are similar, barber, cosmetology, these sorts of things. This issue goes into that, right? This is it's just another, this is just a very narrow element in that larger theme, which again, those sorts of vocational licenses, many of which people got that vocation while they're in prison. I mean, you were a barber in prison, you get out of prison, and then you can't get the license to be a barber. It's rather bizarre. I'm glad I got that vocational training while I was in prison, and now I can't use it. But even so, if we were going to go with panels, then when I go to get married, to get my marriage license, are there any grounds for saying that I shouldn't? What is the public safety issue surrounding me getting married? And I mean, this is for the task of possibly raising children, which has to be the most important thing that a society can do. And I don't think that anybody would consider it valid that you would have to have a panel vet you. I mean, there's, of course, to get a license, there are certain things that you do have to, like you have to pass the Wasserman test or whatever it is these days. In Vietnam, they actually test you for somatic diseases of the brain. So there are certain things that people have come to tolerate about it, but these are some of the things that are floating around this issue, to put it on the larger scope, perhaps too large of a scope in one respect. But I'm interested in public safety, and when there's a bait and switch that goes on, like this group, we'll just treat them all like this group right here, then that's very disingenuous, not on your part. I mean, we just got done passing something that says no to that. But there are the forces out there that are very disingenuously trying to get away with this stuff. And just speaking personally at this point, all that was the official part, speaking personally, that is exactly the slippery slope that removes our civil rights incrementally and step by step, so that you do get people being under house arrest for having TB. So that's my unrehearsed spiel.
Thank you.
No questions?
I guess something popped in my head. Let's move away from the the motion and fear that comes from like thinking about notions of sexual offenses or child molestation. What about somebody who's convicted of 3 DUIs?
Well,
Then
well,
they
you
don't have
know-
a license.
they might
Well,
not have a
okay,
license.
and they get their license back after 18 months. Should that play a role in their ability to drive a taxi? I don't know. I'm just, I just wanted to get away from that. It's very, the example which is a very serious issue. I want to apply all the, appropriate qualifications. There are others that I think when we've talked about this a few months ago, we didn't just exclusively talk about, sort of sexual crimes. When we were just throwing around ideas, so I'm trying to get one that's maybe not so emotionally charged. I mean, DUI is serious. If you hurt someone, it's all that, but Peter.
Actually, just a question of order here. Do we want to finish public input and
Yeah.
then go back to commission comments?
Sure.
Because I do have now a set of comments from all this input,
Sure.
and I want to make
We
sure
should
that
do
everybody
that.
has their say. So.
Yes, sorry. But any questions for Mike? Sorry, I was going to say Snow.
Michael.
Michael, excuse
Snow
me.
leopard, too.
I was going to say I didn't know what I was.
I keep you guys guessing.
Yeah. Any questions for Michael? Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah,
Thank
but I
you.
am sympathetic to the idea of, if I get in a cab, I would like to get where I'm going safely.
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course.
I mean-
You haven't suggested otherwise. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and so I would think that that's involves the ability to drive a car.
Yeah.
And if you can drive the car around Champaign-Urbana, then I don't really know what else I need for you to be able to do.
Well, I must point out that you are a big guy. And you have a frightening appendage there. Anyway, no, but I'm saying you may want to use your imagination to imagine yourself not being the guy you are and being a more vulnerable individual, like an older woman or a child or a girl who's intoxicated or a guy who's intoxicated. I mean, there are a lot of things that you see from your perspective of in this context, you may have some privilege getting into a taxi that you're not going to be a victim. I'm not suggesting that every taxi driver, would do that, but if someone were prone to, you look at the world differently when you have vulnerability.
Well, as a
And-
convicted felon, I do have that. I do have a vulnerability.
Yeah,
not-
well,
not the
I'm
one
sure
you're
you have
speaking
lots of them. We all do. We also have our privileges,
Mhm.
and which we should all be very aware of. And I think as a big, strong guy, you might not be as sensitive as you might be to some of the feelings people would feel who are more vulnerable when they are in a situation like that. So I'm just something to think about. I'm not saying your position is wrong. I'm just saying I look at you and I see somebody who is not vulnerable in that situation we're talking about. So it's something to think about.
Not to match fear with fear, but since we're talking about fear, disparate impact increases fear. That's what decreases public safety. People who are afraid because they can't support their families. People who have fear because they can't get jobs. Obviously when people become afraid, they start not acting as rationally, start doing things that aren't such a good idea. So there's fear on both sides and different qualities of fear. And I don't think that public policy should be written on the back of fear.
I completely agree.
So,
I'm just saying,
Okay.
when you get in a cab, it's a little different
yeah,
than some people.
thank you.
Thank you. Would love to, anyone else want to? All right. Should we turn discussion? Peter, you have a few thoughts?
So, an easy one first, which is the internets are wonderful things. Went and looked up, and the vehicle for hire ordinance is specifically about driving persons around. The additional concerns about limiting who's getting that license is not as central. My personal take on this is I'd like to see some change in what we're going to recommend to City Council. And importantly, I think we want to stay away as a commission from recommending things about that public safety aspect. I think those things just need to be argued in front of the City Council. The City Council has to figure out how to balance that. That's their job. That's why they get paid the big bucks. Or little bucks, as the case may be. But I think we do want to make clear to the City Council where the problems as far as discrimination come. I think we need to say to them, an arbitrary 4-year limit is obviously causing discrimination now. Further, any limit where it's strictly on the basis of felony conviction is going to have this disparate impact. And so any limit you put on where it's a yes or no issue, up or down, is problematic. And one of the things that I was a little interested in as the conversation was going on with some of the public input is this is about licensure and not employment. And there's an interesting difference in that when it comes to licensure, when it comes to employment, the employer has an opportunity to do an interview. After that interview is completed and they say, oh, this person seems like they would be good for this job, then they have the opportunity to say, well, do you have anything in your background of concern with regard to convictions? Oh, you do? Well, let's have a conversation about that and do a further interview. And in the totality of that, decide whether that person is right or not for the job. Whereas in a licensure case, what the city is determining is, are we going to let this person work at all in this particular field? And it's different than hiring them. They don't have that opportunity to take the totality of, is this a person who we can work with? Is this a person who is going to get along with our particular team? This is about a license. And right now, except for this, everything is completely objective about the license giving. Do you have a driver's license? Is it valid? How many, and I haven't gone through the whole list, but how many tickets do you have, et cetera, and so forth. All of these things are very objective criteria. And what we're doing by saying we think you should get rid of this one objective criteria because it has disparate impact is we're going to be forcing them to now have subjective criteria. You should review this person if you want to do something like that. And I think what we should do is say, the objective criteria you are using now has disparate impact. Here's the problems with it. Now, you, City Council, have to go forward and figure out what you want to do about, once you get rid of that bad objective criteria, what to do. I think I hear lots of us, and there are some of us who are in different parts of the community supporting survivors of sexual assault who might have very strong opinions to express to the City Council about public safety aspects. I hear some of us here talking about different aspects of public safety and what balance the City Council should come up with. I think we as a commission should stay out of that. So I would recommend that we kind of send Todd back to leave the introductory portion, which I think is all great. I think it speaks exactly. But for that last page and a half of the recommendation, to whittle it down to what's causing the disparate impact and what they should stop doing, and don't go too much further into what they should be doing, where that's going to be about the public safety stuff.
I agree.
Is it just disparate impact, or is it also that ordinance says you can't use that as a reason to not deny someone a job?
Well, right, yeah, I mean, I think we need to say that the ordinance currently says that you can use felony conviction or it's felony conviction as strictly the basis for denying the license. And I think we need to say...
No, I mean our human rights ordinance.
Oh, well, the human rights ordinance is about employers, and this isn't about employment, it's
that's right.
about
Okay.
licensure.
Got it.
And so I think what we want to say is, this is about licensure, it's different, but what you are doing now is causing discrimination, and that's problematic, and that needs to stop. What you do beyond that is something for the City Council to hear from the public about. I don't envy some of my friends in the audience who are going to have to go and have that discussion. It's a much different discussion to have.
I agree. Stick to the issue. Oh, seriously. Yeah.
Anyone else? Todd, thoughts?
What I will probably end up doing is adding on some type of language that reflects the discussion and sort of the consensus of the commission, and basically present it all as a package. One of the things about disparate impact is that it can't be decoupled with the purpose for the neutral rule in the first, or the purpose for the neutral rule, right? So if you have a neutral rule saying you have to have a high school education in order to get a job here, right? You can't then, if the reason is because we have a certain level of machinery that you've got to be able to read at a certain level or whatever, as you're saying, well, that rule operates to disparately, it disparately impacts a particular group, you have to address the underlying justification for the rule, and those two have to be weighed against each other in making any type of disparate impact charge or claim. And so I think it would be difficult to present a balanced, thoughtful analysis without talking about the fact of public safety as the justification for the neutral rule. Now, and like I said, I'm happy to reflect, particularly in the report and the recommendation to council, that basically it is the belief of the commission that there should be no recommendations other than just basically what is the finding that there is a disparate impact, and, you know, leaving all of the sort of positive steps in terms of creation of a policy to remediate that to the city council. But I'll probably put that as an addendum onto what's already been generated.
Peter?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think that's fine. I think having our recommendation that, assuming we can all come to agreement on that language, and I think you've heard me sort of try and toss this over to you as a staff thing so that one of us doesn't get stuck with having to write up the text of this. But having the commission's recommendation be, stop doing this set of stuff, this is causing a problem, and especially given our stance on prior conviction, it's a problem in a discriminatory way that we disagree with. Now, the disparate impact here is due to this public safety aspect, and as a commission, we do not have a recommendation about what to do about that. That is the purview of the city council. If you could write up a sense of the commission, we can sort of vote that out, and you can put it in your memo with your recommendations, which are probably going to be more specific about, here's what I think the policy or the new ordinance should look like. I think that's fine.
Great. All right. Thank you all. We have any new business, Todd? We have none, I don't believe. Should we move to your staff report? Sure. Start with the EEO workforce statistics.
Sure. We had an addition, a last-minute addition, so that you saw.
I think it was Hanson Professional Services.
Yes. And so they've had a net decrease in their staff of 16 people. I think they lost their Native American and one of their Asian employees, but otherwise their minority demographic has remained static. They previously received a 2-year recommendation. I'm not seeing that there's any particular reason, obviously by the recommendation, to change that. However, all of these, as always, are recommendations. So I did sort of toss around the 1 year because the 8.3 is kind of low, but my understanding is they're engineers, consultants, and at least at the time it seemed appropriate. So I just wanted to point that out for everyone because it is a new item.
Great. Peter.
So The one that gives me the most concern here that I'd like to hear about is A&R. I don't, A&R we've seen for years, right? And this is not the first time they've come back. A&R was not the group that came to us about the union problem, were they?
I believe they may have been, yes.
So.
And I think it was A&R contractors specifically, because there's two groups.
That was when we had the man who
I
came and
believe
talked about
so,
the
yes.
problem with the trades and getting qualified and how he's forced to just use, okay,
I
got it.
believe so.
All right.
And
I can review the minutes just to make sure.
I would prefer to put A&R off until, if this is an issue with the trades with A&R, and they are making the efforts that, if this is the same one that I'm remembering, I'm just not sure that it is.
I believe it is.
Then I'd be comfortable with continuing on, but continuing to monitor. If this is a pattern that has not corrected itself, that has something to do with the way they are hiring, I'd be much more inclined to have a more serious discussion about what's going on there and do we want to, not go forward with it. You are looking concerned. Is it a timing issue?
No. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to determine whether or not I can access the minutes so that I can tell you. What it was,
previously.
but
I couldn't
should
figure out a way
try to do
quickly
that.
this afternoon
Yeah.
when I first looked at it to go back and look. But and if it is the trades, we've had that discussion before. We can continue to figure out what we can do to help this company if that's what the issue is. But if it's not the trades, if this is just simply about their hiring practices, I don't know that we'd want to approve this at all. So.
Are there questions about any of the other, either the new request or the renewals? Or if not, can we move it, maybe excluding A&R, move on any of this?
Sure.
Is there a motion?
You want to be the stuffy?
Okay, I've got to phrase it correctly.
Yes.
I move that we follow staff recommendations on A&R mechanical services, right?
No,
Contract.
Waters,
Waters mowing,
skip A&R.
oh,
both
gotcha.
are.
Deuce Construction, Aries International, Foth Infrastructure, Geocon Professional, Hanson Professional, Health Alliance, and Springfield Electric.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, any discussion?
Springfield Electric moved from a previous 6 month to a year. Was there a particular reason for that one?
Downsizing.
Is it because they dropped in population and what are we going to
They
do?
dropped significantly.
And there wasn't tremendous churn as far as you could tell? Okay.
Can I also ask, Health Alliance? Did they just like have giant cuts or something?
Mm.
I would not be able to speak to that, so
Okay.
Looks like they dropped.
that's
I
what it
mean,
looks
like-
like in terms of their net.
If you just do the math.
Yeah,
Pretty
Workforce.
big.
116.
Wow, mostly
16.
Yeah.
women. Right.
Yeah.
Your spreadsheet's calculation of negative numbers is still kind of funky.
Yeah. And
80%.
You know what? It has to do with the pasting over. with
Right.
some, and sometimes the correct formulas go in and sometimes.
Any additional questions or concerns? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Todd, can we table A&R till next month, or can we have, is that what we're suggesting?
I think so.
Okay, is that okay, Todd?
Yes,
All right.
and then with your permission, if there are any type of emergency disbursements that need to be made, we will make those disbursements.
Great.
It shouldn't affect existing services or contracts. so.
Okay. Great. All righty, HRO activity report?
Sure.
You tell, I'm sorry, I'm not telling you how.
No, I appreciate it.
All right.
Moving right along.
So let's take a look, first of all, at the substantial contacts. We've had somewhat of an uptick in our contacts, particularly in regards to housing. We've had sort of a spate of complaints. And so generally, it has to do with not student housing, but students who are renting properties or renting apartments. And so as that develops, I'm sure I will keep the commission apprised if we begin to identify patterns amongst landlords. But any questions on those so far?
The no jurisdictions were just outside of Urbana?
Yeah, quite honestly, the last no jurisdiction that you see has to do with if there's a situation where there are individuals, where there's an individual who is engaging in sort of very inappropriate and objectionable conduct, the question comes up, is there anything that the city can do or the office can do? And really, no, there's really no jurisdiction. We deal primarily with businesses who are interacting with the public, not with individuals. And so that's what you see there.
All righty, thank you.
All right, taking a look at the monthly complaint activity report, we've had a couple fall off, and in fact, I should have left them on because we didn't have a quorum in the last two sessions, so you could see that. But the one that had previously been scheduled for public hearing was settled. It was resolved in a mediation that was sponsored by the city, and so that has two cases. The underlying case and the derivative retaliation case have now fallen off. For the cases,
That's not that's not the case that is using our trial.
well, we would have used it in that
Okay, we would have,
situation,
okay,
yes.
all right.
So looking at UC 130101, at this point, I'm waiting for contact back from the complainant with a couple of specific questions that I've raised. UC 130406, that is on hold pending an IDHR claim. We received a request from the complainant and the complainant's attorney that we hold off on further investigation pending their working through the claim with IDHR. So we're very accommodating with that type of request. UC 130709, we've completed the fact-finding review, so where we go on site, do the interviews, and right now I'm drafting the second request for information. UC 131010, I need information from the complainant, additional information from the complainant. And then UC 140201, we're waiting for our initial response. They're actually past their date, and so we're going to begin to move forward with noticing up the possibility of a default.
Peter, pardon me.
For the ones that got settled,
Sure.
because they, at least the first one, already started in on a hearing, at least the preliminary part, and there was a probable cause finding. I know this is controversial, but we are owed something by way of a conclusion.
Right, and actually the matter isn't fully concluded yet. So once she withdraws, you'll see the withdrawal form, and you'll see accompanying documentation with that.
Okay,
But
excellent.
it is going to be up to the parties whether or not they disclose the actual terms of the settlement.
Understood, and I don't think that's required by the ordinance, is it?
No.
Okay.
But the commission is allowed to question whether or not the whatever agreement has been made and whatever withdrawal results from the agreement was made under any type of coercion.
Right.
That's my recollection of the ordinance.
So, yeah, okay, so once the entire settlement is signed, sealed, and delivered, we'll get our official, here is what has happened to the disposition of the case.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Should we move on
and
to?
the budget report, I don't believe there were any major changes to the report other than, does this reflect the mediation fee at this point? Other than the mediation fee, you'll see a payment to Richard Calkins, who's a mediator from Davenport. No, Des Moines.
So does he essentially work as like an arbitrator?
Yeah, or
Okay.
a mediator
Okay.
specifically. He's just an attorney who, that is his practice primarily.
Great.
And he was recommended by the hearing officer, Donald Jackson.
Great.
Any
All right.
questions on that? You'll
No.
see that the charge was $3,000. And what I would remind everyone is the last time we had a public hearing, I think it cost the city upwards of $25,000, just in terms of the fees,
Yeah.
the administrative fees. So
Yeah.
Todd, as always, thank you. Announcements. We have an announcement we'd like to share.
So I'm representing, April is National Autism Awareness Month, and it's a group of people that really are misunderstood and sometimes marginalized as well. So our community does a walk to raise awareness at Hessel Park, April 27th, a Sunday,
Whoa.
at 2 o'clock. So if you'd like to come out and learn more about what people with autism face, that would be a great opportunity. Thanks.
So the last weekend in April, the Sunday, at 2 p.m., please come out to Hessel Park.
Thanks.
Just I
Good to know
repeat
where
it.
to go.
Yeah. Oh, you said it.
Yes, you did.
I just wanted to repeat it. Just
Thanks.
any other announcements? All righty. Thank you all. Have a great month. We'll see you in a little bit. Meeting adjourned.